Hello, my friends. It is day 133, and we're reading 2 Samuel chapter 11 through 2 Samuel chapter 12, and we're also reading 1 Chronicles chapter 20. But before we get into that, I want to thank you for taking a moment to check out this video, and I hope you're finding the yearly Bible reading program to be enjoyable and a huge blessing to you as you continue to search for the Lord and find Him through His Word. If you have not yet accepted the invitation, please take a moment to check out the description box below. And there you'll find the link that will take you directly to the YouVersion Bible app, where you can join a number of people that are reading the Bible every single day and leaving feedback on the things they're learning from God's Word. So we know you'll be blessed by the interaction as much as we will be blessed by your participation in the group. So here we are back in the story of David. And we find some interesting things happening here. This is where the drama comes into the picture, and we start to see a very unique side of David, who has been so far depicted as such a virtuous and such an incredible leader. We find this glimpse, this part of his life, as not being as favorable. And I want you to pay close attention to what's happening here. If you compare what we read today, which would have been at the same moment in David's life, notice how 2 Samuel depicts David and covers this part of his life in comparison to what we find in 1 Chronicles. Notice in 1 Chronicles, there's actually no mention, at least in the things that we've read today and not at all, of Bathsheba, this incident with Uriah. However, Samuel gives us the full picture of everything that goes on. And again, it goes back to the fact that the book of Chronicles is trying to highlight the good things that happened, particularly in David's life, as far as this reading is concerned, but also in the life of the nation of Israel, particularly Judah. It wants to show a positive depiction of Israel so that it can encourage those individuals who are returning back to the promised land after being exiled for so long. The book of Samuel is not necessarily intended for that purpose. It's trying to give us an entire and complete and a balanced view of what actually happened. So when we have these little details, it's for that purpose. It's not at all to try to inspire anyone to do anything. It is more so to give a complete history of things as they happen, and particularly things that are relevant to the life and the story of Israel. So here we have it. David sees this woman, Bathsheba. The text says that she was a very beautiful woman, and just like that, he calls her up and he has relations with her. The thing that I found very interesting about today's reading is this transgression as it occurred, whenever it is all brought to bear and the offense is noted, not just with Uriah, but just the way this was handled. Notice that there is not any direct blame or mention of Bathsheba's participation in this. It's almost as if the picture that we find from Samuel's record depicts her as being completely innocent in this whole ordeal. And that's for a number of reasons. Firstly, David is the king, right? And if he orders her to come up there, she kind of has no choice. She has to go up there, particularly considering the society that she was living in and the value of women in this particular world. So we understand that aspect. But I also want to take into consideration the fact that if this had happened with any other person, I think this would have been written about a bit differently. And I think this is intentional. When you think about who David is, what he is supposed to represent, and what his role and impact was on the nation of Israel, I think the intention is very clear in the way that they depict this story. They want to demonstrate that the offense is so great because the expectation of David is so great. He's not just another man in the world. He's not just, an official. He is the king of Israel. And as the king of Israel, because his power is so great, his ethical compass should be just as great as his power. And I think the Bible is trying to demonstrate to us how important it is for us to have as high of an ethical standard as our responsibility, our authority, and our power and our position. So when we read through this story, we understand that there was such a great expectation of what David should have done and what he should not have done, that they seek to focus the attention on David because he is responsible, not just as the person who, initiated this whole ordeal, but as the person who has power and is expected to use that power responsibly. And he doesn't do that. He takes this man's wife. This man is far more honorable than David is in this situation, because he's willing to put his life on the line for David and for Israel. And Uriah ends up losing his life for this. This is unbelievable. Now, I love the way Nathan comes into the picture, because Nathan is the prophet who comes to David to share with him his wrongdoing. And it is clear that David is able to render justice, because whenever the situation is brought up to him, this story, he's able very quickly to see the wrong that was done and the just act that should be carried out in response to the wrong that was done. And in verse 7, Nathan, in his wise and very subtle way of literally walking David into this situation of recognizing his own wrong, he says to him, "You are that man." And it just causes David to almost deflate in this moment. There's no room for ego. There's no room for boasting in his authority. He recognizes immediately what he has done wrong, and he's guilty of it. He confesses this guilt and this sin. Now, man, this passage, there's so much in this, so we won't be able to get to everything. But one of the things I love about this passage is that in verse 13, he says, "I have sinned against the Lord." And Nathan's response to that is, "Yes, but the Lord has forgiven you. You won't die for this sin." Unfortunately, even though he's forgiven, there's still a consequence. And perhaps this is a note that we can take from this passage, that even in our forgiveness, there are still some consequences we have to face for the things we do in life. I think that's the way God demonstrates his justice, even in the midst of rendering his forgiveness. He's able to spare us, because here's the thing. He has to be just. The other thing is, though, however, is he's also merciful. So how does a just, merciful God render to those individuals who are guilty of sin both his justice and his mercy? And here's what we find here. While David should have died, he didn't, because of God's mercy. God forgave him, God spared him, but God also judged him. And here's what happened. He gave him these things. He says, "You and your family," or rather here, he says in verse 9, "You've despised the word of the Lord and done this horrible deed, for you have murdered Uriah the Hittite with the sword of the Ammonites and stolen his wife. From this time on, your family will live by the sword, because you have despised me and taken Uriah's wife to be your own." That's the first thing. And this is what the Lord says: "Because of what you've done, I will cause your own household to rebel against you, and I will give your wives to another man before your very eyes, and he will go to bed with them in public." That's the second thing. Look at what he says. "You did this secretly, but I will make this happen to you openly in the sight of all Israel." And now we see the trouble, right, that would fill David's eyes or his heart, because think about what has always been his deepest fear. That is, having done to him what was done to Saul. And he's as close as he has ever been to that happening. Yet God, he says, he forgives him, and he won't allow him to die for this sin. So powerful things happening here. Another thing that I found very interesting is the way David responded to the death of the child. Before, he was in sackcloth, ashes, fasting, praying to God. When the child is no longer living, he gets up, washes his face, goes to the tabernacle, worship, he eats, and everyone is like, what's wrong with this guy? And his ability to understand the moment is impeccable. That's one thing I took from this text, is that he had the ability and the sobriety to understand what's going on in this moment, and deal with it and accept God's hand in his life. Such a sober response. And so it helped me understand at moments and in times during our lives, at least for me, when we might say, well, God, how could you do this? How could you be this way? This is not fair, is what we would say, right? No, what's not fair is the fact that we are all sinful human beings, and God gives us chances after chances after chances after chances. That's not fair. If we want fairness, then none of us will survive it, right? So I think, like, when we read David in this way, he's like thinking about this. He's saying, like, what would have been fair is God blowing this whole thing up. God didn't answer my prayer, but that's okay, because what's fair and what's just purely just is him blowing this whole thing up. In fact, what he's imagining is it could have been worse than it is right now. And he looks at the passing of his child as not like a curse or a punishment, if you will, but almost as like, at the end of the day, the child didn't lose anything. I may have lost something, but maybe perhaps I got what I deserve. I mean, that's the way I'm thinking. I mean, look at what he says here. He says, look, while the child was still living, I was weeping. That's what they say. You were weeping. You refused to eat. Now the child is dead. You have stopped your mourning and you're eating again. And this is what David said in response to his advisors. I fasted. I wept while the child was alive, for I said, perhaps the Lord will be gracious to me and let the child live. But why should I fast when he is dead? Can I bring him back again? I will go to him one day, but he cannot return to me. So you see, like, this thing where he's almost accepting the sovereignty of God in this situation, and he's completely content with it. Those are big words. I mean, you got to have a different mindset to say something like this, even when you know you're wrong. You have to think about the world, about God, his participation in his justice differently than what we're used to thinking about it. And I think this is another way to see how David kind of stands out among some of the other characters of the Old Testament. But there's so much more to read. I know there's a lot you would have pulled out of this, so I would love to hear what your thoughts were. I could probably go on and rambling about this, but this is some great reading today, and so we'll keep on reading, see what happens, and we'll see how the Lord will respond to David for the remainder of his life in accordance to what just happened. But listen. Until next time, thank you for watching. Take care. God bless. And remember, live by the word.